Hello everybody, it's Daniel Benting here, and I'm here with another Blender tutorial. This is going to be a fun one. We're going to be doing a sci-fi scene with a planet and a cool asteroid belt, which I'll go into using particles. We'll also go into how to make the asteroids, and we'll also make a little ship for it. I'll also go into final effects and creating the cool light shafts you see coming off the asteroids. Alright, let's get into it. Now, we've got our default scene here. Let's start by deleting our cube and our light. And with Shift A, I'll add in an Icosphere. And we'll get our drop down here when we first add it in, and I'll set my subdivisions to 3. And then right click and I'll set my shading to smooth. And then if we go to our modifiers, we can, as a hotkey, press Ctrl 2, and we'll automatically get a subdivision modifier at level 2. I'll set my render version to 4, the render subdivision. That way we get a nice smooth final render. Now I'll add in a light source. So we want a sun lamp. So we're going to be lighting our planet from our sun. And we'll just move it where we can see it, rotate it. That way I can go into render view, I can see it's lit up. Now I'll go to my world and I'll just set it to black for now. That way it's more realistic. Alright. And I'll just increase my sun. Give it a cool color, I guess. Alright. Now let's split off our window by dragging the corner here, and we'll set this one to shader. There we go. Now in the shader editor we can edit shaders, so we'll select our sphere again and click new on the material tab here. So I've got our principled shader here, and I'm going to be doing something different today. Rather than doing it procedurally, we'll just use textures today, so it's much quicker. We'll just play with blending modes to create different effects. Alright, so we'll add in a image texture node. There it is, and we'll open. The textures we're going to be using today are textures from JHT's Pixel Emporium and also Solar System Scope. I'll leave links to those sites in the description. Alright, so first I'll open Make, and I'll duplicate this, and with this one I'll open Eris. Alright, we've got our two textures. First I'll plug in this one to our base color, and with the node Wrangler add-on enabled, we can click Ctrl T, and we'll quickly get our mapping and texture coordinate nodes. If you don't have that add-on enabled, you can just enable add-ons here through preferences. Go to the add-ons tab and you've got all your add-ons here, so you just search for the node Wrangler and you'll be able to check it on. So we'll set our texture coordinate to generated, and we'll also set our mapping to sphere. There we go, now it's mapped properly. And we'll add in a mix node, color mix RGB. Plug our other texture into the second slot. Also get our mapping to the vector. There we go. We also got to set this to sphere. Alright, we'll try out different blending modes and we'll see what we get. Alright, so when it's completely off, we're just seeing the top slot, which is our make texture. And that looks nice. So if we go up with the factor, we're adding on our other texture, which looks pretty interesting. And I think I'll go with soft light. Okay, we just see all our details from our other texture just get added on in a way that I think looks pretty. That'll do. And now let's just affect our color. So we'll add in a hue saturation node. I think I want my planet to be a little more pale. And then I'll actually just lower this by a little bit. And then we'll just plug that color into our normal. And this is how we're going to create little bump effects from our texture. So go to vector bump, put that in there, and then by default it puts it in the normal. We'll just want to change that to height. There we go. And then get a converter math node and set that to multiply so that we can affect the strength of it. Put it very low. And we can see it's sort of making the lines come out. I don't really think that looks quite right, so I'm going to invert it. So we'll actually go to negative. There we go. To me that looks more correct. Alright. There we go. Just very subtle. And then we'll get a third texture. Plug this into our normal, because this is going to be a normal map, just to add more bump detail. And this time I'll get a Mars normal map texture. And to make the normal map work, we need to use a vector normal map node and stick that in between our bump and our texture. And then we also need to set the color space to non-color. There we go. And now if we look, we'll see that we've got our normal map details from our Mars map. So if we just change our strength, set it to 0, see what it looks like without it. But yeah, we're still also getting our height because our height's something separate entirely. So I'll lower that because I think it's a bit much. There we go. Make it very subtle. It really doesn't need to be that big. Alright, and then we can see now this is affecting our normal map. Alright, and it looks like our map is actually the wrong way around. It looks like our crater is actually poking out. So to fix that, I'll just invert one of the channels. So I'll just grab a combine RGB and separate RGB, and we'll pop them in, and we'll connect everything up. And this just splits off our channels into these sockets so that we can adjust them individually. And I'll throw in an invert and see which one we need to invert. Not quite. I'll duplicate it, see how it goes in the red. Yep. Okay, so the red needed to be inverted. Cool, well that appears to be nice now. You can also see how it looks with others. Usually the blue, you don't want to touch that, but we'll take a look at it. Yeah, no, don't want that. Just Control delete just deletes the node without removing the socket. Alright, and that's great. That's all going in the right direction. Alright, so we can affect our strength again, get it to something that we feel is appropriate. There we go. Something subtle. I think I'll stick with that. And that's basically our planet. We've got our normals, our bump, and our color effects. And I'm going to leave it at that for now. Now we'll just quickly do the atmosphere and clouds. So I'll Shift D and then scale up just slightly. This one can be our clouds. We'll just remove the material from it and add a new material. Alright, just use a principled. We'll also pop in a transparent shader quickly. You can also use the alpha here, but I'll just use the transparent because it's simpler. Alright, mix shader, put that in, and then get a noise texture and another noise texture, plug them into each other, and then I'll get a color ramp. And so we put these together, use the factors of the noise textures, and then put it into the factor of the mix shader. Now that should be right. So I'm going to go with 13.4 for the detail of the first one, and we'll put the roughness up, maybe 2 distortion, just to create that waviness in the clouds. And then we set this lower, and then 1 distortion. Alright, that to 0.65, and we'll go just a tiny bit of distortion, and we'll see how we go with that. Just go Control T just to add the coordinates. You don't have to. Generated's basically the same as not having anything plugged in, but just in case you want to affect it overall with your mapping node. Alright, and we can affect the cutoff. Just so that we can see it quickly in Eevee, I'll set my blending mode in the material tab to blend. That way we have transparency, because without that, transparency doesn't work in Eevee. Alright, and now we can just affect the strength with our color ramp. Affect how much clouds you have and how sharp they are. Yep, see it working here. We've got our wavy clouds going around. Alright, I think I'll stick with that. And we'll quickly add in some normal map detail. We'll get a bump node, plug that into our normal. I'll just go out of render view for a moment, go into solid just so that we don't have to waste resources rendering that, and I'll set up my bump. So we'll get a math node, add, and we'll start with Voronoi texture. So we'll add in a Voronoi texture, distance, and now this is going to create a sort of wavy look, but we want it to look more puffy, so we're going to, actually I'll give a demonstration, so I'll just put this straight in, that way we'll see what it looks like. Alright, yeah, you can see it doing it there, it's sort of pushing it in. I want the opposite of that, so I'm going to invert it. Get a color invert, there we go, now it's puffing out. Alright, and I'll also set my setting to smooth F1 for the Voronoi. That way it smooths it out. We get the smoothness slider now, and we can adjust how smooth the boundaries between each cell are. Alright, and I'll set it high as well. And now we need a second Voronoi, which is why we added this add node in. Plug that in, and just to be sure, you want to be using the distance of your Voronoi, otherwise it won't look right. And now let's just add in a multiply. So duplicate that, put that in, change it to multiply, and I'll set it to something very low because we want the strength to be very, very low. And this is also going to be a multiply as well, because this is basically the strength of these two different textures, and then we add them together. Alright, so 0.001. Alright, we'll see how that looks. Alright, now we can barely see it. Oh, that's very strong. We'll see how the other one looks if we put that up. Now I'll invert this one too. Actually, you know what? I'll go with the noise texture, sorry. Pop that in and we'll go very high with the scale. Sorry about that. Alright. And a little bit of distortion as well. There we go. Delete those. And now I've got something fairly subtle. Maybe make these smaller. Oh yeah, you want to make sure it's barely there. That way there's still some detail, but it's not huge because they're just clouds. Like there's, compared to the planet, they're meant to be fairly small. Alright, I think that'll do. And now we'll just plug in our full shader again, that way we get our mask. Alright, I'll actually switch to cycles just to see how it looks. There we go. Change to GPU rendering just because it's quicker. Alright, nice. Getting some clouds. And the reason why cycles is good because now we can also see the shadows being cast onto the planet, which looks very nice. I'll just go into wireframe mode and then check how close they are to each other. So I'll select this one and select this one. Yeah, I think I can make my clouds a little smaller. That way they're just a little closer to the surface. There we go. And now we'll duplicate that sphere again. So we'll scale this one up a little more. This is going to be our atmosphere. So this one will be very quick. This one needs to be the largest. It needs to encompass both the clouds and the planet. We'll remove the material and then we'll add a new one. Alright, this is just going to be, again like the clouds, a principled shader and a transparent shader. And then mixed together. Alright. We're going to use a layer weight, plug the facing into the factor of our mix, and then get a color ramp. Now I'll set the color of my atmosphere, make it blue, and make it rough as well. And then I'll just go into render view, and we see it working. It's the wrong way around, so I'll flip my points around. There we go. It needs to be thinnest at the front of the planet and thickest at the edge. Alright. I'll turn my overlay off just so that we get rid of that orange line. And then I'll adjust my points. I'll flip these around, that way it makes a little more sense. There we go. And then we can put our points back around. That way the white sort of controls how bright the atmosphere is. Alright, we'll just take a close look at our atmosphere. So zoom right into the edge. And with our color ramp, we can start adjusting the fall off. So I'll set the mode to B-spline so that we get a soft fall off. And I'll also add in a third point. So we'll pull our white over and then add in a black, and then we can pull the black in and you'll see what that's doing. So that's basically softening up the edge of our atmosphere so that we get that edge fall off as well. We've got to make sure it sort of, the thickest part is just above the edge of our planet here. Alright. No, still not enough. Pull the white further up. Alright, make sure there's some space so that it's got a soft fall off. And that will do. That just gives us a slightly softer fall off than before when we just had a hard edge. Alright. And now we just want to add in another point and lower it a little bit. And then we want to lower our white point a little bit, just to affect the strength of our atmosphere overall. There we go, now we've got our atmosphere. I'll just go back to my sun and we'll make it a little larger. That way we get a softer fall off on the edge of our planet. There we go, something like 6.5 degrees. Alright, the angle just changes the size of the sun basically, so larger sun you get softer shadows. Alright, turn our overlay back on so that we can see. That's our planet done. Now we'll have a go at making the world. In our shader editor, let's go to world instead of object. I've got just a flat background. And now let's start with a Voronoi texture. Now we'll plug in our Voronoi to the color, use the distance, and then we'll go into render view and see how that looks. Alright, and we see what that's doing. So we'll just get a color ramp so that we can adjust it. And we actually want to flip it around. So pull the white over to this side. Okay, now I've got all our stars basically. Alright, so we'll just adjust our scale, make it really large. That way we've got lots of stars. We can see that working. Alright, maybe a little smaller. And basically just use the color ramp to just adjust the size and the fall off. There we go, I'll stick with that. Just something simple, nothing too complex. Alright, add in a math node and we'll set it to multiply so that we can increase the strength, and we'll set it to 5. Alright, that way we've got brighter stars. Maybe make them a bit smaller now. Maybe 4. There we go. And now I'll add in a noise texture and a color ramp. And we'll basically get a color add node. So mix RGB, set it to add, and we want to plug this into the factor. And we'll just set this to a dark blue color. That way we just get some variation in our starry background. Put my roughness up a little bit. And my detail. There we go. Alright. That will do. Let's make it something very subtle. I'll just adjust this to affect the strength of it. And it's nothing major, it just creates some variation. Alright, we've got our stars in our planet now. Now let's start on the rings. Alright, so for the rings, I'll just turn on our overlay and we'll add in a circle with Shift A. There we go, there's our circle. We'll scale it up and then we'll go into edit mode with Tab. Press E to extrude with everything selected and we'll scale outwards. That way we get all these faces. And then we want to UV unwrap this because we're actually going to apply a texture of Saturn's rings. Alright, so let's right click with one edge selected and mark the seam. And we'll go to UV editor on our right side. So now if we select everything with A and press U to unwrap, you can click unwrap. And then we see we get this circle. But for our mapping, I'll just show you the texture that we're going to use for the rings. So we've got this texture from Solar System Scope of Saturn's rings. And as you can see, it shows the gradient of the actual rings themselves that will go across the ring that we've modeled. But for that to work properly with our UVs, we actually need straight UVs. We need to turn this sort of coil into a long, straight line of faces. So to do that, I'll first start by finding the face that we have our edge on. Right, there it is. So it's this edge here. So if we select everything again, and I'll go to edge select, see that's our edge. So I'll actually just go to face select mode and I'll grab one of them and I'll straighten it. So I'll just straighten all the vertices. So I'll grab these two first, scale on the X by 0, and then these two and the scale on the X by 0. Then I'll make sure it's flat as well. So scale on the Y by 0, and then grab these two, scale on the Y by 0. There we go. Now I've got one straight face. So if we select everything and make sure that this straightened face is our last selection, if we right click and click follow active quads, we get a straight UV shell. There we go. And now we'll be able to come back to that later. So we'll just pull another window in, bring back our shader editor, and we'll go back to object now that we're working on our rings. So we've got to add in the material tab just a new material. And then on our principled shader, if we click Control T, it'll automatically add these nodes in because of the node wrangler add-on. And we'll open our ring texture. There it is. And I'll go into render mode. Right, and we see the mapping isn't quite working. So I've got UV plugged in properly, it's flat, which is great. So we'll go to our object. And now the problem is, it's actually pointing the wrong direction. So if we rotate our shell 90 degrees with R90, then it should be pointing the right way. But as you can see, the texture covers this area. This is our texture here, and our shell is very thin. So we've got to scale it on the x-axis to make it wider. And I'll actually show you what this is doing. So I'll just turn off the overlay so we get rid of the orange glow. And you'll see what happens. So you can see we're getting more rings as we scale out. So I'll just do all that. Alright, just till it encompasses most of it. And that should be sufficient. Alright, and those are our rings. So I'll just add a subsurface division with Control 2. Now I've got our subsurf. I'll set the render higher. And now I've got a smooth ring. Alright, now this texture also has an alpha channel. So on your texture, you can get the alpha and plug that into the alpha of our shader node here. And that will just make it sort of semi-transparent in places. There, see, we can see the stars through our rings there, especially there. Alright, so that's working beautifully. And that is basically our rings. Alright, so now that we've got that, I'm going to add in a volume where we're going to have basically our asteroids. So we're going to use a particle system for our asteroids so that we can just distribute them around, but we need a volume for that first. So I'm going to start by duplicating our rings. Duplicate that, right click just to let it go. And I'll just name everything first. So we've got rings. Those are our original rings. We'll just hide them for a moment. We've got our planet. It's always a very good idea to name your stuff so that you don't get confused. Alright, I'll just stick that in its own little collection called planet. Get all of that stuff and pop it in. There we go. Now we've got our new circle, and I'll just go into edit mode and I'll extrude upwards just a little bit. And this will be our ring volume. I'll also set it to mirror on the z-axis, and we want clipping on. We also want it above our subdivision. There we go, now it's connected. We're sort of getting this smooth volume. Alright, I'll also add in edge loops just to sort of thicken it up towards the edges, because the subdivision sort of makes it thin out. But that can also work to our advantage as well. So there we go, we've got our ring here, and I'll apply my mirror modifier. Alright, so with our volume, that is basically going to be where our asteroids appear. So now I'll work on just a simple camera angle just to begin with. Probably put it here, so once you've got the view where you want, Control Alt and numpad 0 gets this currently active camera and brings it to your view. Alright, so I'll also maybe do something like that to create an interesting angle of the ring. Then, now that we know where our camera is, whoops, our sun's not facing the right direction. Alright, let me just go to Object Properties here, which is the orange tab, and I'll just zero out my rotation again. So I actually want the light to actually face to one side, directly parallel to the rings. So I'm going to rotate on the y-axis 90 degrees. There we go. I'll go to render mode in the camera, and then I'll set my other view to a viewport, and then I can rotate here and see how it affects my camera. There we go. Yeah, that's about the lighting I want. Alright, so that will do. And the other thing is we're also getting a little bit of noise here, and that's because our rings, actually, whoops, I don't even know what I'm talking about. There we go, now our rings are visible. So we'll see a little bit of noise creep up because of the rings are showing here. That's our 2D rings. But the 2D rings, I only want to be visible in the background. So I'll show you what I mean in a moment. I'll just go back to my shader editor with my rings selected. And I actually just want to add first a math node, set it to multiply, and I'll first increase the strength of our rings so they're not quite as pale. And I also think I'll increase my sun intensity as well, something like 3.5. Alright, and with our rings more visible now, if we go back to a camera, yeah, you can see the rings in the background. You get this line, which is cool. That's what I wanted. but we're also getting a bit of the rings showing up here, and it's creating some noise. But with our final asteroids in, we're not really going to need that. So I'm actually going to eliminate that in our shader. So what I want to do is add in a gradient texture. Control T to add in our mapping. All right. Get another multiplier, put it into here behind it, and then we'll get our gradient. We also need a color ramp to adjust our gradient. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a flat line. So I'll just plug it straight in to our output to see what it's doing. And I think I might set it to object. There we go. Now it's perfectly centered. And that's what we wanted. So if we look at our camera, yeah, the rotation's wrong. So if I just rotate it on the Z axis, 90 degrees, and now as you can see, the far side is illuminated or has a value of 1 white, whereas the side closest to the camera is black, and the black is where the rings are not going to show up. And that's what I wanted, because I wanted to eliminate the rings in our foreground but not in our background. Alright, and now we see with the whole thing working, we can still see our rings. I'll actually probably sharpen it a bit. There we go. So now if we go back, there we go. And now we've got clean render here, because there was all this noise before. Alright, so we've got our background ring, and that's done. So let's continue. We want to make our asteroids now. So we were looking at our volume where we're going to put our final asteroids. So we turn on my overlay. So we'll hide the planet for now. That way we've only got this one showing with our volume. So this is where our emitter is going to go. But I'll just hide it because I actually want to work on the asteroids. So we're going to start by adding in a cube. Probably give that a couple subdivision levels. And then we'll apply that. And we'll work with that geometry in sculpting mode. So come up here to object mode and drop it down, find sculpting. And then if we click G, we'll automatically go to the grab brush. And F is how you also change the size of your brush here. Alright. And this just allows us to quickly manipulate the shape of our object. So I'm just going to quickly create an asteroid. Nothing too complex. Just dragging it out, getting some shapes in. And there we go. That's the basic shape. I think I'm going to add in another subdivision level. And then apply that. And we'll continue sculpting. And I'll actually get the crease brush. And then if we just press Control inverts the actual brush. So by default, crease sort of pushes a sharp line into your model, as you can see there. But if we press Control to invert it, it sort of does the opposite and pushes a sharp line out. So I'm just going to create a bunch of little ridges around our asteroid in different directions, just to create some interesting hard shapes. And I'll also crease it in a little bit to just dip some areas down. I'm just creating different shapes. Probably push it in here, just create a bit of a divot, and then pull it out there, pull it out there. And this is all just using the crease brush. Just pushing it in, pulling it out, pushing it in, pulling it out, to create some different areas. And yeah, I'm trying to be quick, just to create a simple shape, because when we get our materials on, it's going to look kind of cool. And we're also going to use micro polygon displacement as well, which is a really fun effect to make your shapes look more dynamic. Alright, I think I'll just sharpen this part. There we go. And that's one of our asteroids. Yeah, you can always find new ways of creating different shapes and just work with it as much as you like until you've got a shape you like. I think I'm going to stick with this. And then first I'll just save my work. It's always very important to do that in case something terrible happens. So let's call this space field. Alright, save that. And now we'll continue. So I'll actually start by duplicating this because we are going to want different asteroids. We don't want to just distribute the same asteroid around our rings. So with this one, it's great because we've already got a basis. We can get the grab brush with G, scale it up, and just affect the shape of our asteroid. Make this one sort of a sharp triangle. There we go. That sort of makes a very big shape. Alright. And then we can also work a little more with the Crease Brush, creating some ridges and dips. And the reason why I went so low poly is because when we're distributing it, we're obviously going to have a lot of asteroids, so it's going to get pretty hefty on our computer. It's going to take a bit to render it, so you want to be as conservative as possible. Also, you're also going to get detail from the micro polygon displacement, which we'll use later. So the base shape doesn't matter a whole lot. You're just creating some basic shapes. I've actually got to change the shape of this one actually, because it's sort of just the same shape but stretched out. So let me just push some stuff in. And I'm also using, if you press shift, you get the smooth brush, so you can like smooth stuff out. So like I could just remove this whole detail and then do something else. Maybe make this part come out in the middle and cut it in there. There we go. Those are asteroids. You can make as many as you want, because we're just going to stick them in a collection, and then the particle will just grab random ones from that collection. So, and that's really great. So you can have as many as you like, have as much variation as you like. You can do it with any object as well, which is great. So yeah, we'll just do that. Sorry, I'm going to duplicate all of these again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to decimate all these ones, because I'm actually going to have two emitters. Ones with bigger asteroids and one with much smaller asteroids. And with the much smaller ones, we're not going to see them as easily. So we need much less detail. So I'll just get a decimate modifier on them. And collapse is fine, leave it at that setting and pull the ratio down. And then we'll get something very low. And yeah, as you can see, if we just turn that off here with this button, yeah, the shape has pretty much been maintained. It's just lower res. So I'll just select everything. Make sure you select the decimated one last. And then if we Control L, we can connect the modifiers from our main selected object to our other objects. There we go. Got the same decimate modifier on all of them. So I'll apply all those. And now we can work on a material for our asteroids. We're just going to make one, but you can obviously have different asteroids with different materials. But to keep it simple, we'll just make one and apply it to all of them. So again, I'll grab all my objects, not the sun or the camera. And you want to make sure your object with the material you want is the last one you selected, or the one that's yellow. And then you Control L, and this time you want materials. And there we go. That's just a great way to connect different attributes from one object to many others. And now we have that same material. So we'll just call that asteroid, and we can start working on it. Alright, let me first just put smooth shading on these objects. So get all our asteroids, right click smooth shading. There we go. Now we can work on the material. Now all these asteroids will have the same material like I said, so we just got to work on this one material. Let's just get rid of our UV editor. There we go, now we can work on it. Now I'll start with big details first. So we'll start with the Voronoi, and we'll plug that into the normal. We'll get a bump node. There we are, plug that into the height, and then we'll just Control T to add mapping and texture coordinate, and put the object into the vector. That way it just goes off the object coordinates for the texture. Now if we click one of our asteroids and we click numpad /, it actually isolates the object. This is great for when you just want to work on one object without anything else in the scene. But we actually just need to select our sun lamp as well. So if you just press / and then press it again, it will bring everything back. So we'll just select our asteroid and our sun, / numpad. There we go. Now we've got our object isolated with our light source. So now when we go into render view, we've got our light and our asteroid. Alright. So I'll just change to Eevee for this, so it's we can see more easily what's going on. Alright. Now I'll just change this to smooth F1, the Voronoi setting. Alright. And we'll just adjust the smoothness just so that it's not super sharp. And I'll also change the size. What I want this layer to do is to sort of create these big sort of chunks missing from the asteroid. Just create some variation on the surface. Alright. And then I'll actually add in some warping to that effect, because at the moment we've got all these fairly straight lines. We've got a line there, a line there, a line there for all of our cells. Just to see it easier, we'll turn down the smoothness here. You can see all those lines. And we want to warp that, so I'm going to get a noise texture to warp that. Alright, pull that in, get a mix node, plug that in to the color, and then we'll use our factor, and we'll just use overlay. There we go, and we can see that working. So if we turn it off, turn the factor down to 0, it's not working, and then as we turn it up, we get more detail in our lines. I'll just turn up the scale, and that's created some large scale detail. Alright, and then next we'll add in some smaller detail. So I'll just get in a math node, put that at the front of our height. We want it to be add because we're adding in another detail. And I'll duplicate this noise texture, put the scale up higher, and then we'll add that on. Right, now I've got all these smaller bumps, but they're a bit much, so we'll add in another math, put it here, and then we'll just change it to multiply. Alright, so we'll change it to a very low amount, and then we'll see what it's doing. So if we click M to mute on our add, you can see what it looks like with and without it. Yeah, it's very subtle. Then I'll also get a multiply for this, that way we can affect the strength of this. Probably turn it down to 0.8. There we go. And there's one more level of detail, so that's probably going to be my smallest scale. Just to make the, yeah, we'll scale it up. There we go. That way we get this rough, rocky surface. Put the detail up, and then, yeah, there we go. Now I've got this rough surface. So that's going to be my smallest detail. But I'm just going to put another add node in, put it there, and we're going to add in a sort of mid-level detail. And this is going to be done with a noise and a Voronoi put through it. So put the color of the noise into the vector of the Voronoi. And then we can take a look at what that looks like on its own, just put it through the height. And we've got this very chaotic sort of noise that's being affected by our Voronoi, rather than the aimless noise that sort of has more direction from the cell pattern of the Voronoi. Alright, so it's a bit big. I'm going to turn it down. I'm just going to see what it looks like just with this layer. Yeah, and you can see how it affects it. It looks pretty cool when you're moving it around. There we go. Something like that looks okay. And I'll just take a look at my smallest layer on its own as well. Yeah, there we go. Alright, and now I'll just put it all together. So we'll plug the distance into our add. There we go. And we also need a multiply. So we'll duplicate that, put it in. Now we can affect the strength of this mid layer. Alright, and we can mute the add to see what it looks like when we add it on. Yeah, subtle difference. Maybe a little stronger. Alright. And as you can see, we've done quite a bit with just those three layers. If we unplug the normal entirely, see what the base model looks like. Yeah, you can see how much detail that's really adding on. And it's sort of appearing to add these big crevices or dips in the asteroid with these peaks here, and creating these large shadows, which is great. And that's really going to help when we add in our displacement or micro polygon displacement, because it will base it off our height detail here, which is great. So now let's actually work on the color. So I'll plug the height into the base color as well. And I'll just quickly add in a color ramp and sort of make it an earthy sort of brown color, but not too saturated. And we'll make this the middle brighter, and we'll see how that looks. Alright, we can pull our points in, see what happens. Yeah, pull that in a bit, that way the lowest areas are a bit darker. And this is going to affect the highest areas of our asteroid. Color them a little bit. Alright, and then I'll just do a color add. Switch the blending mode to add. Actually, we might do a different blending mode, but we'll look at that in a moment. Let's do a noise texture, and we'll just plug this in to the factor, actually. And we'll choose a different color. Alright, see how multiply looks. Alright, and I'll just pop in a color ramp. That way you can affect the tightness of the texture. Alright, it's a bit large. Probably add in some detail and a little bit more roughness, but we'll make it smaller. There we go. Something like that, and we'll just adjust this. There we go. That way we've just got some blotches that are different colors. Now I'll quickly add in a hue saturation node, and I'll make it darker, maybe desaturate it a little bit, and then we'll actually work on the roughness. So we'll plug in the roughness, and we'll get a roughness map based on the height as well. And this is just a quick way to develop a simple material, because you're basically using the height to create all the other different texture maps, like roughness and color. Alright, we'll go back into render mode and see how it looks. Alright, now just adjust our color ramp. I'll probably raise the black up a little bit because that's too glossy for me. And then we'll probably just lower this a tiny bit. And then we'll pull it in. That way we just get some slight variation. And then I'll also get another color ramp, get the height again. Actually no, we'll get a noise texture this time. And then I'll just plug it into the metallic and see what details we can get with that mixing between our diffuse and our metallic. So metallic has a bit of a different reflectance model. So just turn this to black again. And by pulling the white over, we can see what it looks like as metal. Alright, it's interesting. Flip it around. Make the roughness sort of high so that it breaks up the areas a little bit. Yeah, there we go. That way we've just got some patches that are made of metal. And we can unplug it to see what it looks like, see the difference. There we go. Just some slightly different reflections in some areas. Alright. I think that will do it for the asteroids. Just some simple asteroids with some height and different colors and different effects like the metal. Alright, so let's just press / again on the numpad, and that will bring back the rest of our scene. Alright. Now, we'll actually play with the micro polygon displacement now, since we're in the material. So first we've got to add a vector displacement. And then we'll plug our height into that. Now you want it to be plugged into the height socket. There we go. And the scale is what we're going to use to change our displacement. So if we just plug this socket into our displacement on our output, and now this won't work right off the bat. To make it work, you actually need to go to the render settings, and it only works in cycles, by the way. So change the cycles. Feature set is supported by default, but we need to set it to experimental. And then in the material settings, for the material we want our displacement on, we want to go down to settings, click that drop down, and we've got a section called surface with displacement, and in this drop down we want displacement and bump. You could just do displacement only, but I'm going to have both. There we go. So now that should work. The other important thing is we actually need geometry to physically displace, and these models are quite low poly. So to make them higher poly, we need to add Subsurface Division. So I just press Ctrl+1 there, and now you'll see that now that we're in experimental, the Subsurface Division modifier actually has a new checkbox called Adaptive Subdivision. And this is great because it is a really efficient way of subdividing objects where further objects away are basically divided less. And it divides based on the number of pixels as well. So we'll probably set this to something high because the lower you set it, the tighter it subdivides. So set it to something like 25, and that way it's subdividing per 25 pixels in the final render, but for the viewport it does it every 200. Alright, so now if we go into render view, we'll see what happens. Alright, and you can see just by the silhouette of our selection how the shape has changed. It's now got a lot more detail. If we just unplug the displacement, yeah, you'll see the change. It's definitely huge. Yeah, that's a lot. We'll turn it down a little bit, so just adjust the scale here. Maybe that, and we can take a look at the difference again. Yeah, just to give it some more detail, which is great. Alright, so I'll just quickly tweak a few settings, increasing our overlay to just rough up the Voronoi a little bit. I lowered our Voronoi intensity a little bit with this multiplier because it was taking over the material a little bit, so that we could sort of bring in our smaller effects to roughen the asteroid a bit, so that we know that it's a rough, rocky material. Alright. There we go. Just increase our displacement a little bit to just accentuate a little more. And that works on our lower poly ones as well. But our low poly ones don't need to be very high poly because they're going to be very small and far away from the camera. And I'll also just set my... actually realize it's not working on the others because I haven't added my Subsurface Division yet. Whoops. So we'll do that. But first I'll just set my viewport levels down to 0. That way we're faster in the viewport. Selecting our main one last. Control L, modifiers. Now we've got our modifier on all our asteroids. Oh, it looks like I actually need to check the thing on for all of them. Oh well. Okay, so we'll go through that. Okay, and we're back. It's all done. All our subdivision modifiers are applied properly. Alright. So those all want to be in their own collection. So let's add a new collection with our scene collection selected. There we go. That way it just adds another one in here. We'll name it Asteroids. And then we'll also add another collection. Asteroids Small. There we go. And this is where our low poly asteroids are going to go. So we'll select all of these. Click and drag them into Asteroids Small. Whoops. There we go. And then select all of these and put our main asteroids in our asteroids collection. There we go. And we can hide those for now, so just click the checkbox and we can bring back our planet scene. There we go. Now our emitter volume, which I'll name now, there we go, is right here. I'm actually going to make it smaller because we don't want our asteroids to be all around the rings, because that would be inefficient. We only need to see the ones close to the camera. So I'm actually just going to go to the camera view and then switch my other view to a 3D viewport. And then I can adjust where my rings need to be. So let me just turn off my subdivision in the viewport so that I can see easily. And I'll just delete all the stuff we don't need. Just deleting the back as well because our camera is well into the middle of the ring. Oh, there's also a middle section as well, which I didn't realize. Let's just delete that. There we go. I'll isolate this with / as well. That way we can work on it more easily. And I'll actually bridge the remaining missing faces. So first I'll just delete this edge because we had an edge there we didn't want. And then I'll select this edge loop. This one, this one, this one, this one. We'll just deselect the ends and then right click bridge edge loops. There we go. Now we've got a solid volume again. So I'll add another edge here just to thicken that up. There we go. And that should be right. Alright, now that our volume is ready, let me just isolate it with / on the numpad. That way we can play with it and just our emitter. So if we come down to the emitter tab just here, we'll see there's a plus and a minus sign. We just press the plus to add in a new emitter, and we've got our emitter. Alright, we want to leave it as emitter here, and the number is basically the number of particles. So we'll leave that low to begin with so that we can just tweak other settings. Because if we put it high, it's going to cost a lot of resources and it's going to slow the viewport down. Alright, so first of all, I want to change my frame start and end to the same value. So on our timeline, you can see we're currently on 1, and we want to stay there because this is an animation. So I've just changed my end to 1 as well, which is the same as the start, which basically allows all our particles to appear at the same time. Because what the particle system does is, when set to emitter, it basically emits particles over the course of the duration. So when the start and the end are the same, you get all your particles in that same moment. Right, and those are all the settings we need there. Now, if we click this source drop down, we'll actually see a few settings. and we want to change the emit from setting. By default, it's just set to faces. So we just want to change that to volume, and basically that's going to change, instead of our particles appearing attached to the faces of our object, it's going to appear in the space that it takes up, or the volume. Alright, and we'll turn off even distribution, this way it's a little more random. There we go. Now we'll check on rotation as well, that way we can have random rotation. And we'll come back to that because at the moment we can't really see what that's doing. Alright, so render, here's an important one. So we've got render as, by default it's set to halo, which is why you're seeing all these circles. We can change that to collection. And basically now we get this instance collection field here, and we can select our asteroids, and there we go. Now it's taking all our asteroids in that collection and distributing them randomly around our emitter, which is great. And now if we come back to the rotation, we can see this randomize field, and if we put that up, it randomizes the rotation, as opposed to all the objects facing the same way, which is unnatural. Alright, so we'll just put that up, maybe put the phase up as well, and then we'll also adjust the scale randomness. That way we have different sized asteroids, something like that. And we'll just make them a bit smaller. And you can see what it's doing in the viewport here as well. Alright, now they're a bit distributed at the moment, we will fix that. Alright, and in the instance collection area we have a few other settings like object rotation. That's really optional. We don't want global coordinates. We don't want whole collection because otherwise that's just going to put our whole collection group together and then distribute it around, as opposed to just grabbing each object individually and putting it in a random spot. So just leave that off. But I will check on pick a random. That way we've got a random number of each of our asteroids. It's just picking which one it wants where randomly. Alright, another important thing is the emitter checkbox here. So I've checked it on, and by default it usually is checked on. But you just want to make sure that's checked off, because as you can see, what it does is it actually makes you see your emitter volume. So if we turn that off, it just allows us to see our actual emitted objects from our emitter and not the emitter itself. And that just allows us to see all our asteroids as we'd see them in the render. You can also do that in the render as well. You want to make sure that's checked off. Alright. Now we also want to just adjust this checkbox here. So under emit from in the source, we've got use modifier stack. Now that's checked off by default, but we want that on. That way it takes into account all the modifiers we've got applied to our emitter object. And right now we have a Subsurface Division applied. So if we turn that on, we get a more realistic distribution of our actual asteroids. Alright, and now we can actually adjust our particles. So I'll just, in the viewport, I'll just hide my rings. So if I click this drop down just here, we can just add our render tile here, which allows us to disable and enable rendering. So as you can see, it's enabled for everything, which is great, but I just want to adjust my visibility in the viewport, which is the eye symbol. So we come to our rings, just click that eye, that way we can't see it in our viewport anymore, which is great. Alright, so now we'll just tweak our asteroids. We'll go back to the emitter tab. We'll turn up our amount, maybe 4,000, and then we've got quite a few asteroids. So we'll actually go with even distribution because I like the way it spreads them out. You can always change these settings and adjust it to however you like. There's so many different combinations. There's also seed, which sort of changes how they're distributed, so you can like find one that you like. So we'll just go into render view quickly, and we'll see what it looks like. Yeah, and as we can see, we've got all our asteroids, and I'll actually move the camera up because I think it's a bit far away. So I'll just press / again on the numpad so that we see our whole scene again, and then I'll go to our camera and I'll just adjust it, grabbing it and moving it on the Z-axis. I think I'll also just scale my actual emitter volume. So we'll select the emitter and we'll scale it on the Z-axis. There we go. That way we just get some more spread on our asteroids. And there we go. Alright. I'll probably move my camera back down now because I think it's covering a little bit too much of the screen. Alright, and I might adjust my rotation. I actually might move it back a little bit, that way we get more asteroids in the shot. That just gives us a sense of distance. I'll just free rotate it by double clicking R. Alright. I'll select my emitter object again and we'll try out children. So we'll click that, go to simple and display amount 2. That just increases the number. And yeah, that adds in a lot of asteroids. So I'll maybe decrease my total amount. And children is good too because it actually costs less to use children than to turn up the number. So you can turn up your children high and then have a low number, but then your distribution isn't as good. So it's good to find a nice mix between what looks good and the performance. Alright, now that I'm happy with the camera angle, I'm actually going to add in a little detail over on the side of our scene. So we just turn on our overlay again. I'll turn on my rings as well. There we go. And I'll press 1 on the numpad just to go to front view. That way we just get a straightened view again. Alright. I'll add in a plane and I'll move that to the left of the scene. We'll rotate it 90 degrees, Z 90 degrees. That way it's facing the planet. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to scale this. So what I want to create is the effect of the rings sort of blocking the light from the planet. So if I just make it a thin strip, and then we'll go into render mode and see how it affects the scene. There we go. Now you can sort of see this strip of darkness being cast. It's not too exaggerated. Light's still making it into that gap, but it's just created a bit of a shadow. And that's what I wanted. Alright. Just a quick way to sort of fake that shadowing effect of the rings. And now I think I'm going to duplicate our particle system. So let me just Shift D, and then I'll just right click to let it go, and I'll actually scale it in toward the middle. And now I'll just scale the asteroids down a lot because they're quite large still. I want these ones to be very small. Oh, whoops. Sorry, we want to split off our particle system. So we'll just split that off there. And then we'll just adjust our size again now that we've got a separate instance of our particles. 0.05. Now we've got these very small particles. Make them even smaller. There we go. Probably make less of them as well. And I'll also scale this in. And the other thing we can do is just affect the distribution of our actual children. So we've got a radius. There we go. And I'll just rotate it a little just to put it to one side. And now I've just got this sort of closer ring to the planet of asteroids, just to sort of create more breakup in our scene. Actually, probably just have a little less distribution and have less of them. That should be it. The other thing I wanted to do is just to duplicate this particle system one more time, but we're not going to move it this time. We're going to leave it because remember I still wanted to have my smaller particles. So, and that reminds me, for this really far particle system, it's probably just best to use our low poly asteroids, whereas we're actually using our high poly ones right now. So let me just select this one, and on this particle system we'll just change the collection from asteroids to asteroid small. And there we go. And now it's just using our low poly asteroids. Alright, now we'll go back to this, and we've got our duplicated version here, volume 002. And we'll just change to asteroid small for this one as well. But we'll scale them down, because this is supposed to be our really small asteroids. Yeah, here we are. Oh, whoops, sorry, I made the same mistake again. We've got to click this button to create a completely separate particle system. There we go. Otherwise it will treat it like it's the same one and use the same settings across the other objects. Alright. Now we'll just go back to our scale. 0.4. And we also got to just change our seed so that we get asteroids in different spots. There we go. Just turn off my overlay. And yep, you can see our little asteroids. Probably make them a little smaller. They're like supposed to be like tiny little bits broken off. There we go, and probably have a bunch of them. Alright. And I might actually adjust one more setting. So we've got our radius, and we'll probably make this one a little wider. That way we get a little more spread of our little sort of pebble break-offs. Whoops, we've got to actually change back because we ruined our first volume emitter. So let's change that back. There we go. And we'll just check that our settings have been maintained. Yep. Great. And that's pretty much the setup. I'm pretty happy with that. Alright, just so we're not confused, I'll just name all my volumes. And I'll just hide them in the viewport, that way our viewport speeds up. There we go. Nice and quick again. And because we've just hidden that in the viewport, they'll still render, as long as we have this checked on. So that's great. Alright, now we've still got the ship to make, but just before we do that, there's one little thing I want to add to the distant asteroid emitter. So we'll just bring that back into our viewport. There we go. Go into rendered mode just to see it. And there we go. Okay, we see our little asteroids sprinkled in front of our planet over there. Now, I actually want this to have a bit of a volume appearance to it. Like there's sort of a mist through where that distant belt is. And to do that, I'm just going to quickly add a Taurus. So I'll go back into solid view. Look at my scene over here in the right. I'll just straighten up my viewport by pressing 1 on the numpad just to view the front. There we go. Now I've got a straight view again. And then I'll add my Taurus in. There we go. So just add that to the center of the scene, and then we can sort of have it around where our asteroids are. So we can see that our asteroids are over here, and we want our Taurus to be around that area. I'm also going to scale it up on the z-axis as well, make it a bit tall. And this will help us define the volume later. Alright, just quickly set it to smooth, and then we'll add a material to it in the material tab. I'll just make this view a shader editor. Alright, and we're just going to delete the principled shader and add in an emission shader instead. And we want this to be a volume. So we're going to plug this into the volume output. And the reason we're using an emission shader is because it actually renders a lot quicker than, say, a volume scatter node. And we're just trying to fake that look of volume throughout our asteroids. And because it's far away, it's not such a big deal that we're using emission. But we're going to end up with a much smoother render because of it. So let's just take a look at how that looks. And you can see our volume is sort of lit up, and it's denser in the middle and then gets thinner towards the edges because it's a volume. But I'll turn it down just a little bit and maybe make it a little bit blue. And now we actually get to adjust where the volume appears with textures. So I'm going to add in a gradient texture and put that into the strength. We'll also get a color ramp because that will allow us to adjust it. And then with my gradient texture selected, Control T to add in our mapping and coordinate nodes. And then we'll set it to object. There we go. And I also want my gradient texture to be a quadratic sphere. And this will basically allow me to sort of cut off the top and bottom of my sphere. So if I just adjust my scaling here, and we see what the Z does, it sort of pushes it down, as opposed to it taking up the entire height of the volume. You can also adjust these two, say turn them down, that way we get a wider look. There we go. And just tweak it till it's sort of a smaller shape. Because what I want it to do is basically have a soft fall off towards the top and bottom. There we go. And now it's got that really soft fall off all around because I've adjusted the scale. Because what it's doing is basically it's creating a sphere in 3D space, and we're adjusting where that sphere appears using the scale here. So now it's sort of like an ellipse. Alright. Now I'll go back to my camera view with numpad 0. And yeah, we can see it's still too tall. So I'm going to crank the z-axis, which will thin it out. And there we go. Now I've got this thin band with a soft fall off. So probably just turn down my strength a little bit. So I'll do that by just adding a multiplier, and then we can turn that down. There we go. Alright, now I'm actually going to cut off the sides of my texture with some more gradients. So I'll just go into solid view so that it's faster. There we go. And we'll add in, whoops, there we go, with our Taurus selected. We'll continue with our gradient. So I'll duplicate this time make it a linear gradient, and then Control T to map that. And then I'm going to add another multiply node behind this. So this is our main multiplier where we affect the overall strength. And this is one where we want to plug in our second input from our linear gradient so that we can sort of cut off parts of this spherical gradient. Alright, we'll see how that looks. We'll see what it's doing. So I think it's actually cutting off the top of it, so let's rotate it, see how we go. The other thing to help is also to add a color ramp. Oh, and we also want object coordinates as well. There we go. Yeah, we can see it's sort of cutting off this side and not this side. So I'll tighten it by pulling the white over, just so that we can see it more easily. There we go. See, it's cutting off there. Alright, so I just want to rotate this. So I'll go to my camera view again, and I'll just rotate it till I'm happy with it. So we'll need to rotate it on the Z-axis. And I want to make sure it's sort of, if we go into solid view, we can see our camera here. And I want to sort of cut through along this axis from where the camera is viewing. So I'm just going to rotate it till it looks like it's doing that. Yeah, something like that. And then we can just use our color ramp. Now I'm going to add a third point and make it black on the other side as well. That way we sort of just only have it illuminating in the middle. And now you can see that we've got a soft fall off. I'll just plug it into my output so we can see. There we go, and we can see that's what it's doing. It's got this illuminated, but it falls off here and it falls off over here. But I actually want to move it over a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the location of the X. There we go. So we can move it over. And then I'll also adjust the scale so that we get softer fall off. There we go, something like 0.5. And this just gives us more room to play with on our color ramp. Alright, I'll set it to ease as well to smooth it out. There we go. And that just allows me to, if we go to our camera view, sort of fall it off in different areas. I want it to sort of taper off just before it reaches outside the frame. And then I sort of want to taper it off on this side as well when it goes into darkness. I only really want the volume to be visible where the light's shining on it, which is the left side. Alright, we'll try B-spline as well, see how that looks. There we go, that makes it a bit softer, so I'll add another point on the right side of my ramp. Make that black as well, just so that I can cut that left side off again. And there we go. That looks like a nice fall off for me. And now we can look at our whole shader again. And we can see we've got this sort of band right here. So I'll turn up the total multiplier. And yeah, you can see this nice band. It sort of disappears into the darkness there. And it disappears towards the edge here. But yeah, it looks pretty nice. I think I might bring this over a little bit. That way we just get a bit more emission there. And I'm pretty happy with that. I'll just adjust the strength back down a little bit. That way it's just subtle. There we go, that'll do. And now that that part is done, we can work on the ship now. Alright, so I'll just go back in the solid view. Alright. And now I'm just going to adjust my collections because they're a little bit of a mess. So we've got our plane here, which is our sort of our shadow block for our planet. So I'll just name that shadow block. And then we've got our Taurus, which is our emission volume. So I'll name that emission volume. And then I'm going to grab those and drag them into this main collection here. And I'll name this collection scene. I'll also grab our planet collection, and we'll actually, if we drag this and hover it over the scene collection, it'll add that collection inside the scene collection. There we go. And now we've sort of got our whole scene in this scene collection here. So there we go, we can minimize the planet so that it's cleaner, and we've got all our other stuff as well. We've got our emitters, and we can hide the emitters in the viewport like I said earlier, just to save performance. So we only need to see it in the render, which is why we've got this part checked on. Alright, and now we've got a fast viewport. We've got our asteroids. We just need to leave them off because our emitters are grabbing the asteroids. We don't need to see those collections. And we're going to add one more collection. So with my scene collection selected, we'll just press this add collection button to add a collection inside the scene collection. And there we go, we've got scene 2. We'll just rename it to ship. And this is the collection where we're going to make our ship. First I'll just bring it outside everything. Just hover it to the main collection here. And there we go. So I'll hide my other collections, so turn off that. And now we're only seeing our ship collection down here. Now we can just straighten our camera and we're ready to start working on the ship. Right, so that's it for this episode. We've set up our scene and set up our asteroids, our emitters, and our planet. And next episode we'll be able to finish off our scene, go over final tweaks, rendering, and the compositing of the cool light shafts of our scene, and we'll also briefly go over the making of the ship as well, so stay tuned for that. Alright, bye guys.